All right, how about now? That sounds better. All right, getting to teach today. I hadn't got to teach in a while, and y'all know my life has been kind of chaotic, so I took a little bit of a break, and I'm excited to get to teach again. It's something I've really looked forward to, and whenever you teach, if your life is really just so chaotic that you've just got so many things that you're trying to do and accomplish, it's, for me, I don't know how a lot of you that teach, how that works for you, but for me, it kind of comes from within here, and it comes out, and whenever I teach, I want to do the best job that I can, and so I took a little bit of break, and now I'm back in the rotation. I'm going to teach some more, so I'm looking forward to that. And I like to do everything from character studies to teaching through start beginning to end, go through books and the Bible, and I enjoy doing that. And then occasionally I'll teach about an experience or perspective that I've had. And today that's the kind of lesson that we're going to do. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of backstory whenever we get started here, and that'll lead you up to how I wound up teaching on this subject. I wound up studying about this subject for my own benefit, and it wound up being a subject that was beneficial to me, so I wanted to share that study with you this morning, and I thought it might be beneficial to you as well. The backstory. So going into spring, and usually the stories that I tell a lot of times will have something to do with the farm or the cattle, or it'll have to do with construction or building or something. It's part of my life every day, and it's something I experience a lot, so this one's relating to the farm. And as we were coming into spring, before we got into spring, if you want to do the best you can with your hay ground, you'll go to your hay ground and you'll pull samples. And I've got a bucket with an auger bit, and I'll run it down through there, and it'll put some of the dirt into the bucket. And I'll go around all over the hayfield in different spots, and some of that dirt off of each spot goes all into one, and you mix it up, and you put it in a box, and you send it off to UT. And they do a soil analysis on that soil, and they'll send you back a report, and it'll tell you in that report exactly what you need to put on that soil as far as fertilize. That way you're not wasting your money or just blindly putting fertilizer on, or urea, just trying to get it to grow just extra. It gives the soil what it needs, which gives the grass what it needs, which gives more nutrients to the hay, and it's a very good way to do that. So this past fall I did that, and I sent that off, and I was prepared as spring rolled around. And usually you put your fertilizer on in March, and that's what I did this year. I went in March, and I got a buggy over at the co-op. They mixed my fertilizer, and I went to the hay ground, and I put it out, and I cut on, I've got about 7 different fields that I cut, but they're clustered together in 2 different areas. And so I put that out in March, and then when you put it out, then you wait. And you see what the weather does. Well, unless you don't remember, this past spring was wet. It rained. It rained every 2 days, every 3 days. It rained. That's great starting out, but in between the rain, you were getting sunshine and warmth, and it was really a nice hay growing spring, and it grew and it grew and it just kept growing, and it was thick. And I would go by the fields and check on it, and I thought, wow, that's going to be some thick hay, and I was excited about it. Maybe some of the thickest hay that I've ever got off of those fields. And some of these fields Dad and I had been cutting for 30 years, so it's not that I'm unfamiliar with it. I know what hay usually looks like, and it was really exceptional. And then we get on into May, and a lot of times late May or sometime in June is when you're aiming to cut your spring cutting, so it'll have time to grow to be able to cut in the fall. And then we hit May, and it rained every 2-3 days, and it kept raining. And we got all the way into the 1st of June, and it was still doing that. And then all us farmers are looking around thinking, that's a lot of rain. To be able to get up hay, and especially with me doing it by myself, I need at least 3 days, better to have 4 of no rain. And I don't like to cut unless it's 20% chance of rain or less. So I was watching for that, and I wasn't getting it. Finally, 3rd week of June, we get a dry spell that they're saying is coming. All you hay cutters can get in the hayfield, they say, but the 3rd week of June, we were headed on vacation with the family. So here I was fretting. All right, how about now? All right. That's okay. Most people get real tore up over awkward silence. I can do awkward silence, so it's okay. So back to my story. I need about 4 days. 3 days I can do, 4 days is best. By the time you cut, dry it, and get it rolled, I'm looking for that, and it's hard to get. And then, so we go ahead and we go on vacation, and I put it out of my mind because I look forward to vacation with the family every spring. And we go on, and I always say spring, and they always tell me it's not spring, it's just June. But anyway, we're down there, and everybody I know is cutting hay, everybody. And then I looked on the radar just out of curiosity because I'm still thinking about it a little bit. Lo and behold, there's a storm front coming across Tennessee on Sunday evening, and it dumps, and it wets everybody's hay. So everybody got wet hay, and then, of course, the family was like, see? Being on vacation with them kept me from getting it wet. So then I get back, and I don't really get to cut hay until, we get into July. We're in the first part of July is when I get to start cutting hay. And it really is some of the thickest hay that I've ever seen that we've had on these fields. It's very thick. And as I start to get the hay up and I'm starting to cut the hay, then it is, because it's thicker when I'm cutting it, I'm thinking it's just, it's really, really nice hay. As we start to take the hay up, as I start to take it up, it's more of a challenge than I'm used to. And I've got a new to me rake. It's a V rake. It sits down behind the tractor, and it'll pull in 25 feet of hay into a windrow. So I'm thinking I'm going to gain a lot of time. Well, when I'm starting to roll that into a windrow, and first time I've used it in thick hay, I had it last year. Something catches my eye, and I look back, and there's a mountain of hay had piled up, had caught in that thing, and it's taller than the tractor, and it's coming toward me. And I'm like, I don't know what's happened here. So I stop, and I opened it up, and the hay drops out. And so I figure out I've got issues with that. So I finally figure out how to get it rolled into a windrow, and then I start baling, and then more problems come. The hay is so thick, and the windrows are so big that it's dragging on the belly of the tractor, and it'll roll up underneath there, and then a big roll of it will get into hit the roller, and then it'll stick, and it binds the roller up. So I'm having all these issues with trying to roll this hay, and then storms start to form around, and then Gina's texting me, and I'm not looking at the phone because I'm pushing. I'm going as hard as I can go, and I'm pushing as hard as I can go, but I've got my watch on, and it buzzes, and I look, and storms are forming, and I see that. And the particular field that I was in is not that far from Danny and Denise, and I was looking back over toward Danny and Denise's, and the sky's dark, and I'm thinking, man, this is bad. I'm not going to get the hay up. I'm going so slow. I'm in low gear, barely creeping, just trying to get the hay through the roller, and I'm having issues, and it's binding up, and it's a problem. You get a roll bound up in it, you have to eject the roll, push it out, roll it out by hand all the way rolled out. That's taking time. Nearly 100 degrees. It's very hot. I'm wet with sweat. I'm not a happy individual. I'm very frustrated at this moment. And it eventually gets to the point that I can't take it anymore. I'm feeling defeated, worn out, hot. And I'm used to the heat. I'm out in it all the time, but I'm just frustrated to the point I'm angry, and I stop. And I drive the tractor over to where I've got the truck parked at under the shade tree, and I get off the tractor, and I get on the back of the truck, and I get me a cold Gatorade off the bottom. I'm sitting there drinking it, feeling sorry for myself. I think my hay's about to get wet. And as I'm looking out across the field, I'm mulling things over, and I'm thinking, and my attitude's poor at this point. And then I start thinking to myself, I think I've got problems with hay and rollers and rakes and all this stuff. That's not my problem. My problem at that moment is that I was ungrateful. I had an attitude problem more than anything. Part of the reason I was having issues is I was pushing too hard. And I was dealing with hay that, if you would have asked me before that moment, would have been a blessing from God, that He gave me something that I'd wished I'd had in the past. And the reason I say that is there's been a bunch of times, and farmers are nosy. I don't know if you know this or not. You'll drive by other farms and you'll look, you'll see what so-and-so's doing, and you'll see their hay fields. And I've seen hay fields, and I've thought to myself, man, I wished our hay'd be that thick. Or I'd see, reels on Facebook of people rolling hay and big, thick hay fields and hay rows. And I've always thought about that, and I didn't really spend the time praying to God for it, but I thought about it. So at that moment, I realized that God had gave me what I'd always sit and thought about, the thickest hay I'd ever had, and I wasn't dealing well with it, and I had ingratitude. I was struggling with ingratitude, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. So I went home, and I studied about that, and it wasn't just that night. I studied other nights, and my frustration caused my whole attitude to be wrong. I was looking at everything wrong. I was making my situation worse. Some of my issues were becoming self-inflicted. And I got to thinking, I wonder what other areas of my life I might be doing the same thing in. And hopefully as we go through this, you'll see that this is not an isolated occurrence for a lot of us. As we go through this, as we study some of these lessons, you can be ungrateful very easily and not realize it. What does it mean to be ungrateful? If somebody said you're ungrateful, what do you think they're telling you? Not satisfied with what you have? Yeah? I mean, the word ungrateful, the definition of it is unappreciative. It's not displaying gratitude. It's exactly what was happening to me. I didn't appreciate that hay. I was hating it at that point. The second part of that definition is interesting to me because it says not giving due return or recompense for benefits. Recompense meaning to return in kind. It's if you have ingratitude or you're ungrateful, then I usually say that people have a new normal, like whatever is not normal, or whatever is normal is just normal to you. Everybody has their normal and different things. But you get something that's a blessing and you feel like it's a blessing and it's something that's special and you're grateful to that to start with. You're grateful for it to start with, but that begins to go away when that becomes your new normal, when you get used to what your new normal is and you become less grateful for things. And I think we all do it. And that's what I got to studying about. And then I got to thinking, does the Bible use the word ungrateful? Does it say anything about ungrateful? And the answer is yes, it does. It's Luke chapter 6, verses 35 and 36. It talks about being ungrateful. Luke 6, 35 and 36. It says, but love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the unthankful. And unthankful and ungrateful is really the same word. When you get to studying this, that's what it is. If you're not grateful for something, you're not thankful for it. But it says that God is kind. He's kind to the unthankful and the evil. Therefore, be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. He's telling us, in a way, to be kind to ungrateful people because God is. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Is interesting too because it uses that same Greek word and it uses the word as unthankful. It translates in our English in the King James or New King James as unthankful. Starting in verse 1, we'll go down through verse 7. It says, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful. And, look at the company if you're being ungrateful or have an ungrateful attitude that you're keeping with this list of things that are really sinful things. It's with unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And from such people turn away. For this sort are those who creep into households and make captive gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. We think ungrateful sometimes is not a big deal. Sitting there on that tailgate, I realized I was ungrateful, and I thought, well, I can understand it. I'm frustrated. This isn't going right. But really, and I know it's just hay. It's just hay. It's what it is, but I didn't feel that way at that point. There's a lot goes into all that with the hay. You got to have hay to feed cattle. If you don't have hay to feed cattle, you got to buy hay. It'll be thousands of dollars if you don't get it up. So I'm thinking about all that, but I'm missing the point of what God has blessed me with, and I'm not going about it in the right way. So many parts of our lives, we can do the same thing. And if we think ungrateful or unappreciative or unthankful is not a big deal, look at the company it's keeping in these verses. And he's very plain with what he tells us here. I guess when you think of it with that perspective, it starts to make it seem like a more serious issue if we become ungrateful. Who do we think of in the Bible when we think of somebody that's ungrateful? There's ungrateful people in the Bible. If somebody says ungrateful to me, there's usually a group that I think of right off. Who would that be? Now, Monty's not here. Y'all going to have to kick in. I left a little Monty time in my lesson. I'm going to be done early if y'all don't speak up. There you go. Every time when somebody says, if somebody's ungrateful, who do you think of? I think of the children of Israel. They were ungrateful. Why? God would bless them. They would bless them and they would They would get the blessings that they asked for. They would get extra. He would give them things, and then lo and behold, that would become their new normal, and then that would eventually slip away because they'd come ungrateful, and then they would get themselves involved in sin. They're an easy target. I'm not even going to talk about them other than that, because there's lots of other folks I discovered when I got to studying this. And unfortunately, if you look at life from a realistic perspective, I think a lot of us will realize that we have times that we're ungrateful too, and we're not a lot different than them. We get to expecting things a certain way, and there's a sense of entitlement in our nation now that I think that I see in folks that can rub off sometimes, so it's something to be aware of too. So we're going to go through and look at a few folks that I discovered that I feel like that they were ungrateful. And it doesn't necessarily always say that they were ungrateful, but their actions and how they handled things and the way they went about things tells me they about have to be. And I thought I'd start all the way at the beginning with Adam and Eve. I think Adam and Eve maybe weren't as grateful for their situation as they should have been. And we know the story of Adam and Eve. We won't spend a lot of time there in Genesis, but I wanted to mention about Adam and Eve, and it's Genesis chapter 3. Let's see, Genesis. Well, we'll get to that here in a minute. Well, what I want to really say about it, I guess, is Adam and Eve was in probably the ideal situation. We think about the situation they had with the garden that was created just for them to be in. They had everything that they could possibly need, but they had one tree they weren't supposed to touch, and the fruit of it was off limits. And out of everything they had, that's the one thing that they focused on. What were some of the blessings that Adam and Eve had in that garden? Like I said, I want to go off of what you know about the story a little bit more than going and reading the story, and for time's sake, we won't do that anyway. But what were some of the blessings they had? Everything they needed. All of it. You know, communed with God. What bigger blessing can you get than that? I mean, that's like, you don't get bigger than that kind of blessing. From a farmer's perspective, from a person that works outside, and we build houses that we have to clear land, and we're in spots a whole lot where we have briars get a hold of us. They'll get you in different places. There were no thorns or thistles or briars in the garden that God had asked them to tend. Wouldn't that be so much easier? Those of you that garden and you ladies that have flower beds and do things, there's no weed pulling and all that. For the tending you have to do, so they didn't have that to deal with. What else hadn't happened yet? That didn't happen until Noah's time. Hadn't rained. Genesis 3:18 will tell you about the thorns and the thistles and that, but didn't mention that. But Genesis 2:6 says there was dew that came up from the earth and watered the ground, so they didn't have rain to deal with. If they didn't deal with rain, then they didn't have to deal with mud. They didn't have to deal with shelters that would get them out of the rain. They know that they weren't clothed when they started out, because when they committed their sin, then God clothed them, because they knew then that they were naked. If they weren't naked, or if they were naked and they weren't clothed, they probably had the ideal weather, right? They didn't have extreme weather swings. They probably had perfect weather all the time, every day. It's what they got up and got to look forward to. So there was no clothes to get in the way. There was nothing to worry about storing or putting anywhere or picking out or making it fit right. There was no issues with that. Y'all know when you're trying to work, you have those issues with clothes hanging on things and binding, and they didn't have any of that to deal with. So we could probably keep going and think of other things that they were blessed with, but the real thing to think about is, why didn't they look around and figure out the depth of the blessings they had and look at it less enticing to follow the serpent's encouragement to take of that fruit? Well, I don't really know the answer to that, but I can only guess that they probably took things for granted because it's all they knew. They didn't have anything to compare that to, even though God had told them that their eyes would be opened and that they would surely die the spiritual death they didn't realize was there, was coming. Unthankfulness for their blessings had to have been a factor in that. So David is the next one we're going to listen to, and 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 5 is what we're going to look at. And we've all heard the story of David and Bathsheba. I would say since I've been a Christian of about 19, right around 20 years old, I've probably heard 100 stories, Bible lessons, preached from the pulpit about David and Bathsheba. We could tell the story really without going and reading it, but I thought it was worth us looking at him a little bit just for the things that we get from it. And we're going to read through verses 1 through 5 just to get some context and refresh our memory. Starting in chapter 11 of 2 Samuel, verses 1 through 5. It happened in the spring of the year at the time when kings go out to do battle that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. So right away we notice some things, and like I said, we know the story. He stayed back. He didn't go out to do battle. Why is that significant? It says that the time when kings go out to do battle, David should have been with them. He should have been with his people. And he sent them, and he didn't go with them. He hung back and stayed at Israel. And he said, and all Israel went as well. But we know that's not exactly right, because Bathsheba wouldn't have been there taking a bath if all Israel had went. But the context of that, what he's really saying here, is that everybody that was part of the group that would fight or do battle went. All of them went, but David didn't. He stayed back. Beginning of his issue. I think he took his men for granted, the people a little bit for granted that would go fight, or maybe he had extreme confidence in them. I'm not sure. But at any rate, he stayed back and took his leisure. Then it goes on in verse 2. It says, then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked onto the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about the woman. And someone said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity. And she returned to her house, and the woman conceived. And so she sent and told David that she is with child. Now, a funny thing, y'all probably laugh at this. I think it's funny now. Back when I was a young Christian and I was learning about these stories and I was studying this, I thought she was sinning. Well, she didn't sin. David sinned because he saw her taking a bath, and her name is Bathsheba. So I thought, how is that correlated? But it's really not what it's talking about. Bathsheba means daughter of promise. It has nothing to do with her taking a bath. It's just a curious thing. So it says it happened, and when he went over and he looked off and he saw her on the rooftop, when you go on down and you look through that, and he inquired about this woman, he had to inquire about this woman with the people that he was surrounded with. And then it says someone. It doesn't say who the someone was, but he said, is this not Bathsheba, daughter of Elam, wife of Uriah the Hittite? So this person knew who Bathsheba was. And I asked myself when I read that, I wonder why. I wonder why she knows that. Now, David noticed her beauty from the rooftop. It was immediate. He was enthralled with it. He was tempted by it. He was very curious about her beauty because what he had noticed. So this person, whoever this person was, that noticed her beauty, this person that says, well, isn't this woman, he told who Bathsheba was, he knew that for some reason. I assume it was a he, because that's probably who David would have had surrounded him. Why did he know that? Was it because he also noticed her beauty? Did he realize how attractive Bathsheba was? I mean, she lived right there beside David's house. These people worked in and out the house. He'd probably seen her, you would think. Or did he know some of the family? I don't know, but this person pointed out right away. And whatever the case, there had evidently been no kind of approaching from this person like David wound up doing. He knew that the person was married. But when David heard that she was married, that she was married to Uriah, that didn't slow him down. He didn't think otherwise. He immediately sent people and retrieved her. And he knew that him being the king, the fact that he wanted to have her brought to him, that she couldn't refuse. You didn't do that. You didn't refuse if the king requested your presence. So she had to go, and she went. And it didn't slow David down a bit, even though he had been told that she had a wife. And you could go on through the rest of the story, and then whenever you get through it all, we see that because David did that, there was a great cost to that. What would have been some of the costs that maybe, we know he lost a child because of it. His child passed, and he lost that, and there was different things that happened. What would have been some of the other things that would have been consequences that would have came because of David's actions that you don't necessarily always talk about? David wound up committing murder. I mean, indirectly, but it was his fault. He directed it. So David committed murder. So there's sin, even more sin on top of it. So that's a consequence that he had to deal with. And he had to live with the fact of knowing that he had Uriah murdered. I think about all the people that was around him. He's inquiring about Bathsheba. He's told that Bathsheba has a husband, but still yet he calls and he brings her in. And you know those people had to know that about David. They knew that he had brought her in, and they didn't necessarily know what happened, but they probably had an idea. And then Bathsheba winds up with child. So there would have been some public shame. There should have been, because people around him would have known it. You know, they had to talk. They understood that. So the consequences of that would have been significant. As a king, he should act better than that. The example would have been lost, and some of their respect for him, no doubt, probably would have to have changed. So there was consequences of that came after that, and I only look at that and I think he had to be ungrateful for some of the things he had, and part of why I say that is David had more wives than that. He had 6 wives that they talk about, but he probably had more. History tells us that he probably had more. What about those 6 wives? Did he not appreciate them? Was there something about them you'd think there was 6 or 7 wives that he had? 7 wives. So that's like 1 for every day of the week. If there was one not in a good mood, there was 6 more. I mean, every day of the week, you could have had somebody that you could have had some commonality with. How did that not translate into he could have been satisfied with his situation, his marriage situation, but yet he still went and took Bathsheba? And then he had the story told to him by the prophets about the poor man and the lamb, and how this rich man took this person's only lamb, and then he was the man. We know that story, and that was David. He couldn't have appreciated what he had like he should have appreciated what he had. And he wouldn't have done that. And you think about things that are precious to you, that you really appreciate and that are important to you. You protect those things and you put them places, and you don't want it lost or damaged or hurt or changed, or you want to protect that and you want to keep it. But then when you get to where you don't appreciate things, you don't appreciate them and protect them and keep them like you should. And it can be anything from any kind of possession you have, obviously all the way up to a spouse that you don't appreciate like you should, because I think David was guilty of that. Samson is the next one, and we won't really turn and look too much at Samson, but I did. It goes, like his story goes from Judges chapter 13 to chapter 16, so there's too much really just to go look at. But some of you may remember I did a character study on Samson one Wednesday night. It's one of my favorite character studies that I did the whole time I did character studies. I brought a big toad in here, and when I opened it up, I had a jawbone in it. I showed you an actual jawbone, how that could really look like something that you could use as a weapon. And it's one of my favorite character studies. But you get to looking at Samson, and we have all these children's Bible studies that come from the story of Samson, but it is anything but a child's story. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting children's stories out of the story of Samson. It's good application, and we can teach our kids with it, and I'm not saying that's wrong at all. But it's very much an adult story if you read through the story of Samson from Judges 13 through 16. When it tells his story, Samson was guilty of a lot of things that's considered sinful. He had anger issues. He had pride issues. He was arrogant at times. He lusted for women. He was a womanizer by all standards. If somebody acted like Samson today, he would, he's a womanizer. He would be in trouble. He should be. If you read through about Samson, he does a lot of other things. Lack of respect. He didn't care for his Nazirite vow that he had taken. His mother had consecrated him as a Nazirite, and he had a vow that he had to honor. He didn't take that. He lied repeatedly about his strength when asked. He often sought revenge for himself, not under God's time or what God's authority or thoughts were. He did it of his own. He didn't have respect for his parents. He didn't honor the things that they told him or asked him for. In Judges 16:1, we'll read that. It says now, 16:1 in Judges, Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. And then he talks about when the Gazarites were told and they tried to figure out a way to kill her, he went into a harlot. He even done that. So it's an adult story very much in every way. So because of all the things that he done, and he wound up getting his hair cut, violating his Nazirite law, the sin that was in his life, that was like the final straw, the ultimate thing, and he lost his relationship with God, and God left him at that point. So that's a major consequence that Samson experienced. But eventually, Samson prayed to God and reinstated his relationship with him to the point that God gave him the strength to push the pillars down. And if you read back history, if you like history, if you read history of when things happened right around that time period, Bible scholars believe that was the beginning of the fall of the Philistine nation, as Samson's push on that and all the ones that were killed there and how it changed things. So he redeemed himself, but the consequences was great. He lost his life. He died at a fairly young age. And, of course, we have all these stories that we can go off with him. There's lots of other folks that I can give you like honorable mentions. We're doing pretty good on time. It's about a quarter till. Want to be sure I get to the end. We're going to mention a few more, and then we're going to get into well, what do you do about this ungrateful situation? If you hear a preacher preach a lesson or a Bible class where they just get up and tell you everything that's probably wrong with you and then they don't give you any solutions, it's really not any help. So we're going to get to some solutions is what I'm going to go to here at the end. Lot's wife, that's Genesis 19 and 26. She was delivered from Sodom's destruction, but she longed so much for Sodom that she looked back. She couldn't possibly have appreciated the deliverance that God was delivering to her. The sons of Eli, I don't often think of the sons of Eli, but if you get to studying their story, they abused their priestly role. They were priests, and they abused that role, and they treated the Lord's offering with contempt rather than gratitude. King Saul, 1 Samuel 13 through 15, and then 18, it talks about King Saul. He was Israel's first chosen king, and he was given victory, yet he disobeyed God's commands. He became jealous of David, and instead of being thankful for God's help, he went down that path. The whole northern kingdom of Israel, whenever they were given the promised land and all the children of Israel got to go into the kingdom in general, they wound up splitting. You had a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom, but the whole kingdom of the northern kingdom of Israel, 2 Kings 17, 7 through 23, you could read about that. Even though God gave them the promised land, the milk and honey, the perfect environment for them to be in, they wound up rejecting his covenant and turned to idols, and you know the story on that. King Nebuchadnezzar, what happened to him? Anybody remember King Nebuchadnezzar and the story about him? Yeah, so King Nebuchadnezzar was blessed with power and success, but what did he do wrong to get put in that situation? He was boastful. All the things that God gave him and the things that God had blessed him with, rather than giving God the credit for it or the acknowledgement for it, he thought he done it. You know, we can do that sometimes. We can think that things that we do in life create our situation and that we're blessed and have the things we have is because of us, and that doesn't take away hard work. You've got to meet God on some of these things that he blesses and gives you. You've got to work and you've got to meet him and you've got to do the things, even, you know, we know in salvation, but in life too. The 9 lepers, there were 10 lepers, but what did the 9 do? They didn't come back. Well, they probably went to their family, to their lives. They went, you know, when all 10 of them were cleansed, only one came back and was actually appreciated. So they weren't thankful for that immense blessing that they'd been given, being cleansed of being lepers. The rich fool in Luke 12, 16 through 21, blessed with abundance, instead of looking how he could help his neighbors and being thankful for what God gave him, he decided to hoard it up for himself and have it all for himself, not really thankful in the right way. Judas Iscariot, you know, we know what happened with Judas. Judas, he was chosen as one of the disciples, entrusted with the responsibility of keeping the money for the group, living in the presence of Jesus. He had fellowship with Jesus and was there with him on a regular basis, yet he betrayed him for money. You know, we look at Judas as a terrible person, but the same thing can happen to us if we're not careful, if we can't value the blessings that we have in our salvation, being able to be a part of God's family here today, being part of the church and being given the things that we're given and the sacrifice that Christ made. If we begin to take all this for granted as our new normal, then we have issues. Now, overcoming gratitude or ingratitude and to keep the right perspective. Life often seems like a series of problems, either some small or some not so small. And that's kind of what life is. It's a series of problems. And if we don't stay on track and work through those problems and overcoming them, then we become overwhelmed sometimes with the problems that we can't get all worked out, and we can become ungrateful for the blessings and the things that we are given. Let's look at a few Bible verses or Bible sections that tell us a little bit about what to do if we feel ourselves being ungrateful. And this first one, I was going to save it down the list. I'm going to put it first because you're probably expecting it coming. Philippians 4, verses 6 through 9. We're going to talk about that one first. Philippians 4, verses 6 through 9, it says, starting in verse 6, it says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your regards be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble or just are pure, are lovely, or of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things, and the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. So some things to notice about this. I know you're probably expecting these verses, and you're probably thinking, well, all that is probably easier said than done. It's a short section of verses that carries a tremendous amount of weight for how we can adjust our lives. It says every good thing in life always takes effort. So if you think that section of verses is harder to do to correct your situations, or if you feel yourself being ungrateful, everything takes effort that's good and worthwhile. And realizing you need to change, or your perspective, or being aware and having this perspective that there's things in your life that you need to be more grateful for, that's really the first step in the right direction that you can take and be on a better path. A study to share with you, and I won't go through a lot of this because we're running a little bit lower on time. There was a study done, and they discovered that millennials and Gen Z are more anxious than previous generations. Now, you hear that, I don't really associate an age with what that means, so I looked that up, and it's ages 29 to 44. So 29 to 44, that's about you. Gen Z is approximately ages 13 to 28 is what it says. Let's see, 29 to 44. I told you backwards. Let me say that again. Millennials and Gen Z are, I'm getting mixed up. Let me go back and say it right. I told you I didn't keep up with what the ages were. So they did the study on them, and it's for the younger generation below 44. So that's what it is. Below 44, this study was done about folks your age. Social media is a problem for those folks. It says they have more anxiety because they spend time on social media, seeing the problems of the world. Some of them not real. Some of them are, but they're connected to that more than they've ever been. They're worried about climate change, economic instability. That's concerns about job security, student debt, and the rising cost of living, academic pressure, intense competition for education and pursuit of that. Increased awareness of mental health. Often if they're more aware of mental health and have more access to that kind of information, you'll think about it more, and some people wind up being self-diagnosed and having issues with that. But here's another thing. Those of us that are above those ages that I just listed, us older folks, had a survey done about us too, and it's discovered that in 2025, our anxiety and stress and struggles with that is progressing at a faster rate than folks younger than us. So us older folks have problems with that too. So I took the time to include this about this survey, not because the survey was done and all that, but more because anxiety and struggles and difficulty, it's a real thing, and we all struggle with it at some point in our life to some extent. And being aware of that and how to go about correcting that is very important. And he gives us the instructions here of how to be able to combat that. It's immersing yourself in God's Word. He says, be anxious for nothing. Well, he starts out with that, I think, because that's not easy to do, but he gives you the formula of how to combat that. It's prayer and supplication and being thankful, trying to be thankful for things you have, and let your requests be known to God. It's the relationship you have with God that's going to help you to be able to overcome those things. And then we're still going to be on the survey somewhere, but our situation will be better with that. Let's look at Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, starting in verse 1, it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves or your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. So if you find yourself in those situations, and it talks about renewing your mind, how do you renew your mind? It's by immersing yourself in the study of God's Word. That's how it said that you can renew it here. And it says that you're not supposed to be like the world. We're supposed to be transformed and be different than the world. It's easy to find anyone that's disgruntled or complaining or that's ungrateful or entitled, or you can be one of those people really easy. It takes a little bit of work not to be one of those kind of people and be conscious of it. So immersing yourself in God's Word, you can renew your mind, and each day, if you study it, it can give you the right perspective or help you with that. 1 Timothy 6, these are some important verses. 1 Timothy 6, verses 1 through 10. Starting in verse 1. Let's drop down to verse 3 for time purposes. Verse 1 and 2 is kind of setting up the rest of the verses. So let's start down in verse 3. If anyone teaches otherwise, let's see if I'm at the right spot. I've got 5 minutes. If anyone teaches otherwise and does not consent to the wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to the doctrine which accords with godliness, he is proud, knowing nothing, but is obsessed with disputes and arguments over words, which come envy, strife, reviling, evil suspicions, useless wranglings of men, corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain, from which withdraw yourselves. So there's some things to notice about this. He says, withdraw yourselves from anyone like this. It's because what we've read here and all the things that go along with this are not the type of people that we should have in our lives. Our mental state can be greatly affected by the people that we have around us. Whether or not we're grateful for our things, the things that God has blessed us with, is often directly connected to the people that we have in our lives most. And we can't always control who that is. It can be somewhere that we're forced to be around because of work situations or people that you're having to be with. But if all possible, don't have those kind of people in your lives. And verses 6 through 10 tells us how we can be content, or the most opportunity that we have of being content. He goes on in 6 through 9, he says, now godliness with contentment is great gain. And he goes on to tell us things about money and the love of money, and it's a snare. And there's nothing wrong with having money. A lot of people use these verses to say that you can't have money, you can't work, and you can't have things. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that it's not supposed to be your very first focus. And I know people that I'm connected with through business that I feel like I would classify them as rich people. Some of the best people I know that are rich people have making money, and the focus of money very much farther down the list. So a couple of things to start to close here for the last of it, and then we'll have questions and we'll talk about it if you have anything. I realized that thick, beautiful hay that I was waiting all spring to get to cut really looked a lot different to me when I was trying to bale it, when I was trying to get it into a roll. It was because my focus had shifted from the beauty and the benefit of that God had given me to what I perceived as all the problems. Couldn't get it through the baler. The baler was stopping up. Gina was texting me and giving me updates. I didn't have to pull my phone out because she was saying it's close, it's approaching, it's on top of you. I know she was probably wishing that I would text her back and say I'm in the truck, but I wasn't. I was still on the tractor getting every roll popped out I could. But I was focusing on the sky turning black, the lightning streaking, and the thunder. And I was on the tractor with my earplugs in, but when I stopped the tractor, it was all so close. It was lightning like sticks cracking. You know what that sounds like. And thunder you could feel, and I got in the truck just as the rain dumped. So if you're wondering if the hay got wet, it absolutely did. But at that moment, my attitude was different than it was at the start of it, because I saw things the way, as a Christian, I should have been seeing things. I was grateful that what God had given me, that I had the opportunity to bale what I'd baled, and sitting on that tailgate when I was praying for God to forgive me for being ungrateful. I said, I know this hay's going to get wet, and if it's meant for it to be wet and I lose it, that's fine. I'll get other hay, but if I can, let me get it up, and I'll do that. And when it got wet, I got in the truck. I drove up on the field where I could see the whole field. It was raining so hard you couldn't see the other side of the field, and I left, and the next day, it came out hot, dry. The sun dried it. I run a tedder through it. I fluffed it, and by 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was baling hay again, rolling hay, with a whole different attitude, and I'm telling you, it went a lot better. I didn't jam another bale, and my troubles, a lot of it was self-inflicted because I saw all of my problems and not my blessings. So I want to close with this. Look at your own lives and see if you have things in your own lives that you're looking at the burdens and the difficulties of it more than the blessings, and try to adjust for that. And I want to get even more closer to home here. When we started this congregation, whether you are someone that gathered together as the original 80-something of us that came together to form this congregation, or whether you have came to us since then, think of what drew you to this congregation, and think about what you saw in this congregation that made you happy to be here and that you saw as a blessing to God, and ask yourself, are those things still here? And if they're not, then why? Is it something that we can fix? We'll work on it. If it's not something we can fix, then think about, why do you feel that way? Is it because that there's problems here? And there's going to be problems in every congregation. I think 2.5 years in, and probably the honeymoon's over. And we've got to look at things from a realistic standpoint. We still love being here and we love the congregation, but it's not the same as it was the first 6 months or 8 months or 10 months or the first year. It's a situation where we're going to have problems and struggles and difficulties, but are we looking at those? Is it somebody? Is it people? Is it a group? Is it what's making you feel unhappy? If you do at all about being here, is your perspective right? And ask yourself that and see if that's what needs adjusting as much as the things that you're perceiving, and try to be here and love it and have the same feeling that you had at the beginning. Any comments before we close? All right. Thank you for your attention.